So welcome, thank you so much for being here today. Can I start by asking you to describe the moment when you first heard the news that you were going to be released?
Yeah, it was really weird. In fact, we'd gone through a period of feeling very hopeful about the possibility of release. There had been quite a few opportunities, political opportunities for the government to let us out, and those had come and gone. All of the legal opportunities to let us out had also come and gone, and we were pretty much in open water. And I woke up on the day really about to getting ready to see my brother, who was due to visit me later that day, thinking that we are going to have to do something to increase the pressure in the campaign. I was really starting to think that I'm going to have to really be ready for another 6 months, if not another 6 years in prison. And I went out for a run. We've got a corridor of about 30 metres long, and I used to run up and down that corridor every day for a good 45 minutes or an hour or so, just to try and keep fit. And so I was in the middle of my morning run when one of the officers came to me and he said, "Look, the boss wants to speak to you." So I went and spoke to the senior officer, the senior investigations officer, and he said, "I've got some news." And I said, "Well, what's up?" And he said, "Pack your stuff, you're going." And I said, what do you mean I'm going? You're moving me to another prison?" He said, "No, the embassy's going to be here in an hour. Get your stuff, you're going home." I couldn't believe it. It seemed so random. It's, yeah, really extraordinary.
And of course there was a huge international response to your imprisonment online, on social media, all around the world. But to what extent were you actually aware that this was happening as it sort of unfolded?
You know, we knew obviously that there was a campaign. We had very limited access to media in prison, of course. The local media, which was following the government's line fairly closely, really wasn't covering very much of it at all. My family and the embassy visits, the embassies would bring us news. They would tell us about some of the things that were going on. And I remember my parents and my brothers saying to me, "Look, you really don't understand just how big this thing is, how many people are following you know, what this story means to so many people." And I kept saying, "Well, yeah, you're right, of course, I'm sure I don't know." In my own mind, though, thinking that, look, I'm a journalist, I get this, this is what I used to do, this is my business, of course I understand. And to come out, when I walked out of into the arrivals hall in Brisbane and saw this incredible reception, saw this massive wall of people at 1 o'clock in the morning, mind, this massive wall of cameras and lights and photographers and people all shouting and cheering and so on, was just extraordinary. I mean, I'm still struggling to come to terms with it. I'm still not sure I really understand it completely. And no, it's a short answer, I didn't really get it.
So you talked about having very limited contact with social media. You mentioned the fact that you ran for an hour a day. But how else did you cope, just on a day-to-day basis, with being in prison?
The problem with prison is that it's a very formless lump of time that you have. There's no structure to the day, much less the week. And when you lose all of your autonomy, you lose control over just about every aspect of your life, what you have to do is assert control over the very limited things that you can control. And that meant for a start, your own physical health, and your own mental health, your mind. And so I very deliberately tried to concentrate on 3 things: being physically fit, mentally fit, and spiritually fit. And so each day I'd start the day with some meditation, just to try and keep your head in a rational space, because to be honest with you, the greatest danger, never mind all of the physical threats, the biggest danger in prison is your own mind. If you're not careful, if you don't look after it, your mind will turn in on itself. It'll start eating itself. You start to slip into depression. You start to imagine things. You start to build up all sorts of scenarios. That's natural, that's normal, but unless you're aware of it, then you run the risk of becoming seriously depressed as a result of it. And so the meditation was key. I also spent a lot of time exercising, as I just mentioned, the running. We also had a sort of program of sit-ups and press-ups and other exercises that we had, just to, again, to try to keep fit physically. And then through much of the first part of our imprisonment, we had lots of things to think about, but not a lot of, plenty of space. But we also tried to devise all sorts of mental games, memory games, and so on. Lots of interesting debates and conversations. But after we were convicted in June, I realised that I'm going to have to dig in for the long haul, and so I took on a master's degree in international relations.
So obviously at Cardiff, we're training journalists, we're just starting out in this industry. So what advice would you give to a new journalist who's just breaking into this world about how to go about upholding the freedoms of press?
Gosh, that's a $64,000 question, and I've often thought about this. The problem is that you guys are entering the industry at a time of enormous change. Social media, the internet has really disrupted the old traditional models of media, of the mainstream media. That makes, I think, that there is a need, more of a need now than ever before for journalists and for good journalism, for rational, intelligent, balanced, incisive journalism. The problem is that the economics of it are falling apart. I think there will always be a way for journalists to survive and thrive, but we're in a period of flux. We don't really know how it's going to work out. And there's also enormous amounts of competition for journalists. There's a temptation for journalists to go freelance, to take quite dramatic risks, to go to front lines and so on, to make a mark for themselves, to establish a reputation as being fearless and courageous and so on, which I think is extremely dangerous, perhaps more dangerous now than ever before. I did it. That's one of the things that got me started, but this is also one of those situations where I would caution against that, and I'd say, do as I say, not as I do. There are ways of setting yourself apart, of trying to create stories, your own work. You need to be creative. You need to apply the kinds of skills that employers want you to have, to be creative, to be inventive, to be brave, not necessarily going to front lines, but taking a few professional risks, for example. Not necessarily personal risks. No editor wants a dead journalist. But you need to be creative, I guess.
So your two colleagues were recently released on bail, but they are returning for trial on Monday. Has there been any indication so far of what's going to happen there?
Well, it is an ongoing trial. I'm also a named defendant in that trial, so that I've got to be very careful. I can't really comment too much on the case itself. All I would say is that we are very pleased that they were released on bail in the first hearing. We think that's an encouraging sign. We know that the Court of Cassation, which ordered the retrial in the first place and overturned our convictions, in its writ said very clearly that the prosecution had failed to find the evidence to prove the allegations against us. We've always said that we're innocent. We've always said that there is no evidence, and we believe that as long as the court follows due process, that they'll acquit us all.
So what's next for you?
Gosh, I've been trying to work this out for most of the past 2 or 3 weeks. Look, what's clear is that I can't go back to my old job as a correspondent. That's just not going to work. I don't want to sound arrogant about it, but I'm better known than just about anyone I could be interviewing, most of the people I could be interviewing at the moment. And that means that as a journalist, as a news journalist, you tend to become bigger than the story, and that's really not very good. That's not the way these things are supposed to work. I still want to remain a journalist. I still want to be a reporter. Whether I do documentaries or current affairs work from time to time remains to be seen. We've got to work that out. But we've also been able to build a platform as press freedom advocates. We've got a relationship with that. People identify me with that. And I'd like to keep going with that. I'd like to be a bit of an advocate for press freedom, and I think that's really important. And I feel as though I'd be abrogating my responsibilities if I walked away from that.